A Chinese-made drone suspended from use by the Australian and US military is still being used by Australian Border Force. The coalition is calling for the ABF to follow the ADF in suspending the use of these Chinese-made drones. Joining me now, Shadow Home Affairs and Cyber Securities Minister James Paterson. Thanks for your time. So the drone's not scrapped, it's suspended. Essentially at the moment there's an assessment to see if it should be used on an ongoing basis, but somehow the ABF is still using it. Is that what's happening here?
So just a bit of background first for your viewers, Tom. The Pentagon in October last year finally banned DJI drones across the US military because they assessed that the company is secretly controlled by the People's Liberation Army. The company has also been sanctioned by the US government for its involvement in human rights abuses against Uyghurs in Xinjiang. Okay. And so I put questions on notice.
There's a security and a moral issue that they've...
Correct, exactly. So I put questions on notice to every department and agency to ask whether or not they were still operating these drones. To their credit, the Department of Defence has come back and said, yes, and we're grounding them pending a review. They will not be used.
So they were using them actively at the time. Once the request came in, is that what happened? Then they said, we'll ground them while we assess the risk?
That's my understanding, although I'll be exploring this in more detail and Senate estimates with them in a few weeks. But they have grounded it after I put in my question on notice. ABF have come back to me and said they also have them, but they are not taking the same action that the Australian Defence Force is in grounding them. They said it's not very operational and because of COVID and various reasons, but they haven't said what the ADF has, which is we're not going to use them anymore.
Could the issue be that if they ground them straight away, we'll have a weakness in terms of Border Force? I mean, it could be that they go, well, we'd love to. We can't get another, I don't know how many drones there are, 41 or something. We can't get them overnight. Because then you wouldn't be too impressed if there were no drones on our borders, for example.
Well, they said they were only using them as part of a trial anyway, so it doesn't sound like it's a key capability that would be disrupted. But if that is the case, I'd be happy to hear that argument. They haven't made that argument.
Right.
And there are other drone manufacturers available and out there, including Australian ones. And of course, if the US military can operate a drone capability without using DJI, I think both the Australian Defence Force and Border Force have the same capacity to do so.
We don't want to waste money. So if the security threat can be assessed and it's not a risk, would that be fair enough? Is that what you want to hear? Because presumably the concern is always, is there something in this device with some sort of dormant element? I'm probably not the most tech-savvy person, but a switch that can be activated and suddenly someone back in China can view something. Is that the realistic concern here? Is that what we want to allay fears of? And then, you know, if we've bought them anyway, let's use them?
These are complex pieces of both hardware and software that underpins it, that allows it to be operated. And the basic concern here, Tom, is any piece of technology which has the capacity to connect to the internet, which is made and operated by a Chinese technology company, is a risk because we can't be absolutely certain that the data it collects doesn't go back to that company and therefore the Chinese government.
Unless you change the software and then
and to this point, the Pentagon doesn't believe that they can put in place sufficient mitigations to protect them from this risk. So I'd be very impressed if a Border Force or the ADF thinks that they can do better than the Pentagon and prevent this risk from occurring.
So barring taking apart the whole thing and figuring out what's in it from the technical side of thing, and then I guess you never know if just 1 in 10 have that element in it, that's the risk, is it? We just, according to the US, we don't know.
In some non-national security related area, perhaps that's a risk that you'd be willing to take and willing to bear. But when it comes to either our Defence Force or our very sensitive border operations, protecting the Australian mainland, I don't think that's a risk we should be taking. And there are other operators out there. There are alternatives. I'm not saying if you can't use this drone, you can't use any drone. They can use other companies that are not headquartered and beholden to the Chinese Communist Party and not involved in human rights abuses against an ethnic minority. I mean, taxpayers' money should be not going to a company involved in that.
You've raised the alarm on quite a few things. Basically, I think all of it were programs that were in place or at least started or purchase agreements under the coalition. Is your concern with the defence more so than anything Labor's doing?
This is not a partisan issue, right? These decisions...
You understand why I'm asking that question?
Yeah.
I mean, I guess, well, you go on, give your answer, I'll ask a follow-up.
I'm not out there saying, you know, the government's a disgrace and they've done this terrible thing. I'm just pointing out a problem which I think needs to be dealt with, and they're in government now, so it is their obligation to deal with it. In the case of these drones, the Pentagon did take action in October last year that was on this government's watch, so I think it's appropriate to ask them to deal with it, and we can't just not address national security issues because of when the software or hardware was put in place.
I guess you allude to this particular situation, so the US took action in October. But, I mean, do you almost wish you'd been asking more questions in government? when you look at this now, how many of these issues were going on? Were you aware of anything at any time and you were encouraged not to speak up?
I mean, I'm doing the job of an opposition senator, right, which is to ask questions of government, and that equal opportunity was available to opposition senators when we were in government, and if they didn't choose to do so, that's a matter for them. But I think there's a more important point here, Tom, which is ministers in the government are not making procurement decisions at this level. It's not really about who is in power from a party political point of view. It is procurement officers in departments many levels below them who are making these decisions, and I think we have both a systemic problem and an individual problem with these technologies.
Right.
Clearly, when assessments have been made in the past about what value for money represents, not enough weight has been put on the security risk. That's how we got Hikvision and Dwar cameras, 1,000 units of them across the Commonwealth.
So this really for you is a department thing you're seeking to clean up?
Yeah.
And all these various issues.
I think that's what it is, and I'd like the government, now that they know about it, now that I brought it to their attention,
They can drive the
to
change.
take leadership.
Where it's all happened is a systemic issue within departments.
That's right. This is an opportunity for the government to take leadership and send a direction.
Better get your quick thoughts on the budget. What's your 30-second, voter comes up to you? What do you make of the budget, Senator? The approach Labor's taking.
I don't know what it is in it yet, but from what I've seen so far, I don't see how this budget deals with the inflation problem. And when I talk to my constituents, cost of living is the number one, number two, number three, number four, number five issue that they face. And really the government isn't doing any of the heavy lifting to get inflation down. It's leaving all of that to the Reserve Bank.
The CPI elements on electricity, for example, will drop because they're not giving people money, they're reducing the price. That's the way to do it. Pressure. Are you saying there's a cost of living measure there should be that's not there? Is there something you'd like to suggest?
I'm saying we need a plan to tackle inflation for everyone, not just by compensating people for the effects of inflation. We need to get inflation down. And this government seems to have the view that the Reserve Bank will just do that by increasing interest rates. Well, the Reserve Bank will have to increase interest rates by more if the government isn't also helping by exercising fiscal discipline, because every dollar they spend makes it even harder for the Reserve Bank to get inflation down.
James Paterson, thanks for your time.
Thank you.